Okay, hi everybody. Well, look, I think you're going to find this one interesting, or at least you're going to find the story that I'm going to be talking about interesting, even if my presentation is as dire as it usually is. I want to talk about a Dutch guy, 69-year-old Dutch guy, or at least he is at the minute, called Emile Ratelband, who is taking his local authority to court because they will not allow him to change his age from being 69 to 49. I know what some of you will be thinking. Your eyes will be rolling already, and you'll be thinking, yeah, we were always going to get here, weren't we? We're at, I suppose, what you would call transageism now. That's where we're at. And I find this really interesting. I'll be honest with you. I know this will not be the only video on YouTube that deals with this, probably not even the only video in your subscriptions feed. But what I don't want to do, because it would just be trivially easy to just bring this up just to scoff and mock at it or whatever. But I think there's something a little bit more to it than this. And it really doesn't matter where you are or where I am with the whole transgender business. What we can do is to look at this and seriously and soberly see if the same arguments do apply, and then make the case of whether, well, if you're on board with one of them, should you really be on board with the other or not? That's what I want to do in this video. I think the first thing that I should do is to read you out an article so you have an idea of what we're talking about, if this is something that has passed your news feed by so far. Okay, this is from the Telegraph, UK. Dutchman, 69, who identifies as 20 years younger. We're using the language already, aren't we? Launches legal battle to change age. I gotta say, there's a picture of the guy. He isn't looking bad for a 69-year-old guy, is he? I wouldn't have said he was 69. Maybe he's getting off to a good start there. A pensioner has begun a legal battle to be recognised as being 20 years younger than his actual age, so he can go back to work and achieve greater success with women on Tinder. What higher goal could you have than that? Emile Ratelband, 69, argues that if transgender people are allowed to change sex, he should be allowed to change his date of birth because doctors said he has the body of a 45-year-old. The entrepreneur and self-help guru is suing his local authority after they refused to amend his age on official documents. Mr. Ratelband's case has now gone to a court in the city of Arnhem, in the eastern Dutch province of Gelderland. Okay, the case has caused controversy in his homeland, with a Dutch edition of Vice, a news website, asking, is Emile Ratelband disturbed or accidentally extremely woke? Mr. Ratelband was born on the 11th of March 1949. Well, he was born then at present anyway, but says he feels at least 20 years younger and wants to change his birth date to 11th of March 1969. Mr. Ratelband says, I have done a check-up and what does it show? My biological age is 45 years. When I'm 69, I am limited. If I'm 49, then I can buy a new house, drive a different car, I can take up more work. When I'm on Tinder, if I say I'm 69, I don't get an answer. When I'm 49, with the face I have, I will be in a luxurious position. No lack of false modesty there. Transgenders can now have their gender changed on their birth certificate. In the same spirit, there should be room for an age change. The Dutchman said he's discriminated against because of his age and that he encounters problems in society on a daily basis. The court is due to deliver a written ruling within 4 weeks. Now, he also says it would be good news for the government, as he would then be renouncing his pension until he reaches the retirement age again. Got to take your hat off to him there, right? He's playing by the rules. He's not expecting to win on both counts. This is the really interesting bit, right? The judge is taking this shit seriously, right? The judge has said he had some sympathy with Mr. Ratelband, as people could now change their gender, which would once have been unthinkable. Okay, so he's accepting that some of the same arguments, I think, could be made in this case. Okay, so fundamentally what I want to do with regard to that is to give you my thoughts with regard to this, and hopefully include some things that nobody else will include in the videos that I make on this. And fundamentally the point that I want to make is that if you are somebody who is on board with transgenderism and he expects people to accept the arguments that you make with regard to this, then as far as I'm concerned, it is simply not acceptable for you to just dismiss this on a knee-jerk whim and to say, oh, this is absolutely unacceptable, to start applying the same things to everything else, because that is where we've been before, isn't it? That was where we went with the Rachel Dolezal case, of course. Back a couple of years ago, where she claimed to be trans-black, transracial, if you like. And then last year, when a researcher in the social sciences, somebody who had all the progressive credentials, called Rebecca Tuvell, did a piece, a peer-reviewed published piece in Hypatia, which is quite a well-known feminist philosophy journal, and that got absolutely panned. There was an open letter of, I believe, around 800 signatures. 800 signatories signed up to that letter criticising Hypatia for even publishing it. Now, some of them did that on the grounds that they didn't believe that it was sufficient quality, but a lot of them, as we saw then on social media, outlined their concerns, and it was really that this is something that shouldn't even be discussed. And I'm absolutely disgusted with that kind of a mentality. It is just beyond hypocritical to adopt that kind of stance, because that stance is from the kind of person generally that has no time for, let's say, the Germaine Greers of this world. The kind of people, the kind of feminists in that case, who are very, very critical of the idea of transgenderism, particularly the idea that you can be a trans woman or that trans women are women. Okay? And yet when anybody else uses the same reasoning to apply it to a trans anything else which has a cultural aspect, suddenly these individuals mutate into Germaine Greers of their own, right, and make all the same kinds of arguments. And instead of taking offence at the Germaine Greers, they become the Germaine Greers. And that is something that I have a real hard time remaining calm about, because that is such a deep level of hypocrisy and such a deep lack of self-awareness to be able to adopt those two kinds of stances. Okay, let me tell you where I'm at with this. I have mixed feelings about the fact that this Emile Ratelband chose date of birth rather than age, because there is a difference there. At the moment, as we're discussing it, there is no difference. You just extrapolate your age from date of birth. I understand that, but I want to try and make a little bit of a distinction here along the same lines that gender has made a distinction from biological sex, even though we didn't used to distinguish between the two. But ultimately, I'm pleased actually that he chose date of birth. I'll explain why. It'll become clear a little bit further on. Let me just explain, let me set the scene with regard to transgender, and then I'll tell you why I think there are some similarities here. So the whole business with this transgender thing over the past few decades, as I understand it, is that originally we didn't really differentiate between gender and biological sex, and we just lumped it in together. And male and man, and female and woman, and the identity, the way that you express masculinity and femininity were just all these things were just lumped in together, and they weren't differentiated between. And then, quite rightly, we've started to differentiate more and more between that which is biological, that which is innate or at least predisposed and has a biological aspect, and that which seems to be much more heavily cultural, right? So wearing a skirt versus wearing trousers, having long hair versus short hair, pink versus blue, all these kinds of things are liable. They're either entirely socially constructed or have a very, very big social element to them, as are some of the expectations we have with regard to the way that women behave and the way that men behave, the way they talk, the way they interact, all these different things. There is a strong social, cultural aspect to our expectations with these things. I think that was an absolutely valid thing to point out. And then when we get in terms of the expression and identity, gender expression and gender identity, what we started to realise, I think, is that the way that people express themselves, the way that they identify themselves, and in fact the way that they feel about themselves may not align with the usual cultural expectations for their biological sex. Indeed, it is often said that people they innately feel that they are a man or a woman, and somebody may be born male, but they feel as if they are a woman, right? This is in terms of their brain, and so we've distinguished between biological sex, which is very clearly a binary, because sexual reproduction is a binary system, and the labels male and female, they don't exist to give everybody a nice label. They are there to give a label to the two roles that we have in sexual reproduction and the individuals who fulfill those roles. That's all it exists for. It's not to give everybody a little label that that'll make them feel nice about themselves, but maybe man and woman and non-binary and whatever else you want could fulfill that role. So we have that kind of understanding. I think the same thing could be said potentially of this whole transage idea, and that maybe we need to separate what you could call chronological age from what we could call cultural age. That's my term, cultural age there. And it may well be that your age expression and identity do not map on to the societal norms that we have for somebody of your chronological age. I'm sure we all understand that. We use terms all the time, don't we? We will say somebody is old for their years. We might say that somebody is young at heart. And we know that some people very much live as you would expect for somebody of their age, and other people really, really don't. They do seem to be old from the time that they're in their late teens, and for other people, they're in their 60s and 70s and still acting like they're a 20-year-old, for crying out loud. Because the way that they act, the way that they identify themselves, and the way that they express themselves aligns culturally with our expectations for somebody that is in a different age group that is exactly the same, in my view, as the situation with gender. There is no difference there whatsoever. And indeed, we talk about people feeling. People say they say, well, I'm 50 years old, but I don't feel 50. I still only feel like I'm in my mid-30s. Other people say the other way around. Life's been particularly shit to them, perhaps particularly tough, and they feel a lot older. They say, I'm 40 years old, but I'm feeling like an old man or an old woman. Okay, it does not map up in exactly the same way. Again, we have things with physical tests. You can look online, search for biological age. You will see fitness questionnaires that you can answer, and it will tell you what they describe as your biological age. So you might be 70 years old, but as this guy says, he's got a body of a 45-year-old, right? They'll tell you, looking at the physical norms, how old does your body appear to be structurally, physically, in terms of cardiovascular output, in terms of strength, in terms of maybe the junk that you've been piling into it, in terms of that and your actual age. Okay, so I think this is really, really interesting. The similarities seem to be very, very great, and so you can make exactly the same case. In fact, in one particular case, I suggest that transage, at least when you're looking at being trans young, there's a better case to be made than you could with regard to transgender or transracial. You will remember one of the criticisms, the heavy criticisms that were made of Rachel Dolezal, was from black people saying, you can go and fuck yourself, Rachel Dolezal. You can't claim to be black because you haven't lived with being black. You haven't had to grow up being black and knowing what it feels like and the discrimination and the racism. So you have no right to label yourself black. That was the claim that was made, often by the same people who would never make the same case with regard to transgenderism. As I say, there's real hypocrisy here. But some people, the Jermaine Greers of this world, again, will make the same case. What right have you to call yourself a woman when you haven't had to go through puberty of a woman as a woman? You haven't had to live with a vagina that pisses out blood once a month. You haven't had to deal with all the shit that women have to deal with, right? These are the cases that are made. With transage, right, Absolutely. This guy here, 69, wants to be 49. He has lived through being 49, right? He does know what being 49 entails. That argument, that criticism that you can make of both transgenderism and transracialism, you cannot make here. So personally, this is kind of where I'm at here. That if you're on board with trans acceptance, by transgender acceptance, I really don't see how you can just reject this out of hand. It seems, superficially at least to me, quite a reasonable claim for him to make. Now, where it didn't seem a reasonable claim, and I did tell you that I'd come back to this, is on the date of birth issue. Because he didn't choose age, did he? Because this is what we're saying. Let's separate age, right? Let's consider age in terms of a cultural age rather than a chronological age, because maybe that's more appropriate to the ways in which we use it. If you're picking a job and you set a limit on an age limit, then surely what's more appropriate is how well maintained somebody is and how old they feel, rather than just simply chronologically how many years since they first popped out of their mother's lady parts, and how many times the earth has orbited the sun since that date. But he chose to pick date of birth. Now, on the face of it, that is clearly absurd, because how can you change your date of birth? You can't. And yet I am so pleased that he's done this, and I'll tell you why. Because one thing that gets under my skin more than anything else with regard to this, and I say this as somebody who is on board with transgenderism and people being able to define themselves as a man or a woman, if that's genuinely how they feel, right, is that the precedent has been set with transgenderism where we play this bullshit doublespeak. And even the British government did this recently in a survey where they're asking people for their input on changes to transgender legislation. They had the documents, I read them. It was a guide of about 30, 40 pages they wanted you to read, where they explicitly outlined the difference between biological sex and gender and explained that these are very, very different things. Do not confuse the two. And then just chucked it all away and pretended they'd never said it, and then just dealt with the two things interchangeably. Dealt with male and female as if it is interchangeable with man and woman. This is something that really annoys me. And so it's government, so-called experts on this, play this little game where they say, no, we're talking about gender, and gender is different to biological sex, and yet most of the issue is changing your biological sex on your passport from male to female or female to male. Or it's changing it on your birth certificate from male to female. Where is the consistency there, right? If you're saying they're two separate things, then they're two separate things. Nobody is changing. Let me make this quite clear. Nobody is changing their biological sex. On your passport, it records your biological sex. On your birth certificate, it records your biological sex. So if you can play fast and loose with those things when it comes to gender and sex, why can't we play equally fast and loose when it comes to your age and your date of birth? So why can't we just say, yeah, we're talking about cultural age. These people, they're not trying to change their chronological age. They're not trying to change their date of birth and chronological age, because that's a different thing. We're talking about their cultural age. That is what's more important. It's the age they associate with. It's what's more relevant to them. Why can't we say these are two separate things and then just pretend we never said it and just change their date of birth on their birth certificate and on their passport, just the same as we've done with the whole transgender thing? Personally, my solution is this, is that on these documents, on your birth certificate, it should include your biological sex, male or female, and the gender that you've been assigned, man or woman. Then if years down the line you are transgender, right, and you transition from a man to a woman or a woman to a man, then that part of your birth certificate or your passport can be altered. but the biological sex, the male-female, will remain the same. Why? Because it has remained the same. And maybe websites like Tinder and government documents need to record separately then, if we're going to be consistent, your date of birth and also your age, which will not be your chronological age. I know it's complicated. It will be your cultural age. Okay, that's about where I'm at with this. Just one little point, which is if you went back 20 or 30 years in the UK, then by changing your gender identity, there would be certain things within society that you could manipulate to your advantage. Things that are offered by the state. You could become a trans woman and retire and get your state pension 5 years earlier. For example, if your partner died, then you would have certain benefits and privileges that you wouldn't have if you was a man, if you identified as a man. Almost all of them have gone now. All of those things have been equalised. Society has become more symmetrical. It's become more fair, more neutral in those regards. We do not have the same neutrality, of course, when it comes to age. We have an age, a minimum age for getting married, for drinking alcohol, for having sexual intercourse, for being able to vote. We also view things in certain circuits differently in certain ways. If I hack somebody to death, I will be tried for murder. If I say that I'm 12 years old, right, I won't be tried for murder because I don't have the same criminal responsibility at that age. Something will happen to me, but I'm not at the age of criminal responsibility at that point. Clearly, there's something manifestly wrong if I kill someone and just say, well, I feel like a 12-year-old, right? That just doesn't work, does it? That doesn't pan out. Neither should I be able to effectively get away with having sex with a 13 or 14-year-old, let's say, as a 46-year-old guy, just by claiming, well, I feel 13 or 14 as well, right? So the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service in the UK, applying their test code, should realise that it's not within the public interest to prosecute me. Obviously, we can't allow people to game the system because there are these age asymmetries. I shouldn't equally be allowed to say, well, I'm 70 years old, I think I'll start having my state pension now, if you don't mind, right? People could, because we have these different situations with regard to age, different legislation, different rights and responsibilities of people of different age, we need to tread a little bit more carefully. And obviously on most of these things, we'd still need to refer to chronological age. But I propose that there would be certain circumstances where really what is perhaps more important is your cultural age, or is how old your body effectively is, right? If you're well preserved, then if you're 45, why should you be ruled out from doing a job that you've got to be under 40 for, when a 35-year-old who's a physical wreck could still apply for that job? So maybe that kind of cultural age is more appropriate in some instances. Interesting. What I'm interested in here is to know what do people think. Because it's nice to actually, I have not seen a single video on this, I've not seen a single commentary on this, so my perceptions haven't been coloured by what anybody else has to say at this point in time when I'm making this video. Interested to know what anybody else thinks. Leave your comments, but please, when you leave your comment, also outline for me, if you could, what your position is on the whole transgender business as well, so I can tie up what you think about this with what you think about the whole transgender issues and the whole business of describing yourself as transgender and trans women and trans men. Okay, interested to know what you think. Thanks for watching. Bye.